Hi, Cassie.
Hi, Ali.
Thank you for meeting with me again to talk about an issue that was, a question that was asked by a client recently, a subscriber to our newsletter. And it was about whether feeding your baby to sleep. So allowing your baby to fall asleep at the breast and then putting the baby to sleep that way is okay. And that's such a good question. And it's something that I haven't written about yet. It's a topic that we haven't covered. And so I was hoping to pick your brain about it, specifically because for anybody that hasn't watched any of our other interviews, because you're an IBCLC, so of course a breastfeeding expert, but also an infant-led sleep specialist. You've done tons of training related to infant sleep, normal infant sleep, and all that good stuff. And so, of course, it seems like you would be the perfect person to ask about this.
Great.
So, what do you think? I think that what I hear, and definitely the way I felt when I was a new parent, was that if I do this, if I let my baby fall asleep at the breast, if that's the way I put my baby to sleep, they'll become dependent on that, and then everything is ruined. Is this true, or is this one of those myths?
It is inherently normal for a baby to fall asleep at the breast for so many reasons. Baby is skin to skin with you. They feel safe. It's warm. It's cozy. But also they're getting hormones through your breast milk that make them sleepy. And so by design, babies are going to fall asleep at the breast. So it is absolutely normal. And I understand the fear or concern that maybe if the baby always falls asleep at the breast, they then become dependent on that, and then nobody else can put the baby to sleep. But thankfully that's not true. The people in our lives, like in our village, are very capable of finding their own ways to help soothe, calm, and put baby to sleep. So maybe your partner is doing bouncing and patting, shushing, singing. They're going to find their own way that comforts the baby, just like you have found your way to comfort the baby. And babies will absolutely figure that out. They learn, like, oh, when I'm with this parent, I get blah, blah, blah. And when I'm with this parent, I get, something different.
Okay. I mean, I definitely found that to be true. I would nurse my babies to sleep. It was just easier. I just, but then when my husband was with them, sometimes that was the case. And I did want to have that flexibility, that it didn't have to be me. And so, like you said, a different person, maybe the baby has different expectations, they have their own ways, and it worked. I mean, sometimes it didn't work quite as well, but then, once the babies kind of started to learn, like, this is how I sleep with this person, this is how I sleep with this person, then it was a more reliable way either way. So definitely, I mean, I hear that, and I think that's very comforting for any parents who are worried about that even if for you the baby really only wants to fall asleep while breastfeeding, it doesn't mean it'll be that way for everyone when you're not around. Okay. And so you mentioned some of the benefits, like the closeness, the comfort, right? It's natural that babies would fall asleep at the breast. I mean, also we usually kind of, at least me, I would always want to feed them right before I wanted them to fall asleep. So they had a nice full belly, hopefully had a longer stretch of sleep. And so, they, I'm sure, are already starting to get sleepy. It's bedtime. So of course that's another reason why they might easily fall asleep while they're eating. And so, like you said, there's that closeness, that connection that they get when they're with you and you're breastfeeding, and that's a benefit. What else? What might some other benefits be to putting babies to sleep like this?
Yeah, I think that it really just provides flexibility in your day to day. I love that, like, if you're traveling or you're just out in the world, you're grocery shopping, you're not necessarily limited to, I have to be at home, I have to be in this particular environment with these particular sounds, or the baby's not going to fall asleep. It provides you that ability to be able to go to the grocery store and like nurse the baby and let them fall asleep in the carrier, or you can nurse them to sleep and then transfer them to the stroller if you want to go have lunch with friends or family. um, if you feel like you're ready to travel and you want to be able to stay in a hotel or an Airbnb or whatever, it ensures that you don't have to have this like perfect environment, which I think can sometimes um, happen. And so I think this is a benefit of that, is that you are everything that the baby needs in order to be able to fall asleep.
Yeah. So I think we hear that one side about not having flexibility, not having enough flexibility as far as like who can put the baby to sleep if that's the way the baby falls asleep. But on the other hand, you're saying like, well, but in another way, it does give you more flexibility, because wherever you are is the right place to go to sleep.
Exactly.
Sometimes even like you can even like fudge the time, right? I mean, I remember doing that. We're like, well, it's not exactly nap time, but this would be a lot more convenient than later. And so like maybe if I breastfeed, they'll fall asleep right now because this would be better. And it would work a lot of times because it was just
Yeah.
such a like there was really that intense association for inducing sleep. So yeah, it can be really handy in that way. Anything else? Any other benefits?
Yeah, I think nursing and being skin to skin with baby, of course, is going to be really beneficial for so many things in reference to being skin to skin, which its impacts on brain growth and development, creating secure attachments with your primary caregiver. And so I think holding babies, being close to them, skin to skin, I think that's always a benefit. But I don't think, yeah, I wouldn't say that letting the baby fall asleep at the breast, I don't know any negatives even. I think there are just so many reasons that it's helpful for both of you, for both you and baby.
Okay. So that was my next question. Could there be any consequences to kind of setting up that habit of letting them fall asleep at the breast and having that be, I mean, maybe a consequence of having that be like the only way that it's done? I mean, I guess we kind of covered that. Obviously, it might restrict someone else's ability to help your baby sleep.
Yeah, I think sometimes like older kiddos, like if we have just been only breastfeeding and using the breast as a way to help the baby sleep for bedtime naps, etc. And now we have a bigger baby and we're ready to start making a transition away from that. I think that maybe in lies where a baby might protest about that a little bit. They might be like, what? Like this is how we've done it for 9 months or or however long. And so then they might be met with some resistance. But I think any big change period and anything that we do is going to be met with resistance sometimes, especially if babies have been used to these certain rhythms, these certain cadences in which we do things. So um, but I don't want anyone to ever feel like just because the baby protests that it doesn't mean you can't make that change, right? So I think knowing that is also really helpful, that, baby might get upset, they might cry, and I think whoever's putting the baby to sleep instead of you. So if you're trying to move away from using the breast, and let's say partner is putting the baby to sleep now, I often encourage that when making that transition, temporarily having partner, help and support with bedtime. And baby might cry, baby might be upset, but making sure partner is still there. We're using some good comfort techniques, rocking, bouncing, shushing, white noise, singing to, etc. You're still meeting their needs, their emotional, social emotional needs, by showing up for them and supporting that emotion. And I think that's super important. There's a big difference between leaving a baby to cry um, alone versus like they're going to get mad sometimes, they're going to get upset, and we just have to love them and support them through it. And so I think that's definitely
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just not being afraid to make those transitions just because the baby protests would be my suggestion there.
Yeah. And I think that can be really comforting to hear for a new parent, because a lot of us, I think, have this. I mean, hearing your baby cry can be pretty intense for some people, and you want to make it stop at all costs. But
Yes.
reminding ourselves that, sometimes this happens, needs to happen. We're still here. We're still comforting them. We're not causing harm, and that it's sometimes just part of growth and development, and they get there.
Yeah, and I feel like too, like if baby like really escalates, like they are super upset, of course, like just put them back to the breast. Like for this nighttime or for this feed or this whatever, it's okay to just go ahead and breastfeed them, let them fall asleep at the breast, and then we just try again tomorrow. You don't necessarily set yourself back by, giving in, if you will. But I just think, the more that we show the baby there are other ways to, I think that can be really helpful as well.
Yeah. And you said something earlier that to me would have been really comforting to hear when I had little babies, that babies want to sleep,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, you were asking me about um oh, I don't remember exactly what you said that inspired that, but yes, like it's so true that babies and children want sleep. It wouldn't necessarily be a normal thing for babies to not sleep with consistency. So that is really reassuring to remember too, that like there, unless there's like something like a medical condition or like something that's impacting their sleep, which that would be needed to be brought up to your provider, your pediatrician. But as a general rule, like normal healthy babies want to sleep. They need sleep just like anyone else, and so they don't necessarily fight it in the same ways that maybe, a toddler who knows that you're gonna watch TV after they go to sleep. Um,
Mhm.
they're not gonna fight it in that same way that a toddler might.
Yeah. And so I think that's really helpful to me to realize, like, okay, this baby is not just going to fight sleep. They'll fall asleep. They want to fall asleep. So even if I'm not offering this method that I would normally offer, or that, that she's going to have to fall asleep with her dad tonight instead of me, but she wants to sleep. Like, there is definitely a very strong need and want to sleep, and she will. That helps a lot to hear. But are there babies that really do just have sleep problems? Maybe not a problem of not wanting to sleep, but any other sleep problems or anything that people might think is a sleep problem, but that is, maybe just more normal.
Yeah, I think if you suspect that your baby is having sleep problems, I would definitely recommend checking in with a provider. So whether that is, again, your pediatrician, occupational therapy, even checking in with a lactation consultant to kind of assess like what's normal versus what might not be normal. Um, because, I mean, it's tricky because it can be normal for babies to do some cluster feeding overnight sometimes. So that might mean that they wake up a little bit more often. They're not, sleeping as long of stretches. But cluster feeding is usually temporary. So we would like to see that like they have this bout of cluster feeding, but then they go back to sleeping their normal like stretches of sleep. But if you feel like your baby is consistently waking up with frequency, like we're really struggling, I think it's always worth checking in just to rule out yeah, something bigger. My first go-tos would be like sleep apnea, oral function, um, sensory processing disorder. Those would be the big ones that I would like want to rule out. Um, so I think yes, if you feel it is possible, but I do want to put emphasis too that it's not common. Like that wouldn't necessarily be a common thing. I think it's more normal for babies to have very normal sleep patterns. What I would say is normal for a baby. Newborns, 2 to 3 hour stretches of sleep is very normal. Around 2 weeks, ideally, baby is back to their birth weight, and then we don't have to wake them for feedings anymore. But even then, I would still like to see that the baby's waking up like every 4 hours or so, and then that eventually does stretch into about 5 hours. And I would consider sleeping through the night to be 5 hours. I feel like that sounds short when I say that out loud to an adult who might prefer to sleep 8, 10 hours at night. But 5 hours is 2 whole sleep cycles for an adult. And so you do feel a lot more refreshed with 5 hours than you do with 3. So I do feel like it starts to feel easier once we start getting those longer stretches.
I agree. There was something a little bit magic about that. That just felt better. Yeah. And so sometimes what we see in a newborn where we think there's something wrong, it's just a normal developmental, step that they're taking. They're doing that cluster feeding. They're having a growth spurt. So they wake up a lot or whatever it is. But those things usually pass pretty quickly, right? So
Yes, so much. And I always tell people, like, when your baby is like getting ready to roll over, do you know how major that is for a baby? Like how exciting it is? And so it's very challenging to sleep when they're like, "Do you see this cool thing I almost did? Like I have got to master this thing before I can ever sleep again." It's not literally, but you know what I mean? They're like, "Oh my gosh, like this is so cool." And then you're going to see, like, if the baby starts waking up frequently, whereas they hadn't been doing that before, and all of a sudden they're waking up a bunch, like your baby is on the verge of doing something very cool. And so I would just wait until they get through that growth spurt, and then you're going to see, like, oh my gosh, they started to crawl, or they're pulling themselves up on the furniture, like something major is happening. And then they get through that, and then they start sleeping those normal stretches again.
okay. Really important to remember that. And so if you're not going to be feeding your baby to sleep for whatever reason, or maybe you want to just kind of branch out and try a lot of different things, see how flexible, your baby can be. Some people just naturally are that way, right? I mean, I know, like, I've known people who just like took their baby places and just did things, and the baby just fell asleep wherever, doing whatever at any time. And that always surprised me. Like, how, I mean, don't you have like a nap time? But that's very flexible. Not everyone is that flexible, but maybe we want to have a few different tools that we have that we know will work to help our babies sleep. And so, what are some other ideas besides feeding to sleep?
Yeah, movement is a big one for sure. And that makes so much sense. Like if we think about the baby's experience in the womb, they're constantly getting that movement, that rocking motion. And so it really makes sense, like after they're born and when forever, really. So I like to think of things like putting the baby in a carrier or a sling. That's one of my favorites for those reluctant nappers, for sure, is like during the day, just put the baby in a carrier and then bop around the house, do the dishes, laundry, vacuum, whatever. That's super helpful. Going for a drive or a car ride. Like how often have we heard that like suggested from providers, right? Or grandmas. They're like, "Oh, just, go for a drive with the baby." There's a reason for that. Um, yeah, I think movement, any bouncing, like I love yoga balls for that. Put the baby in a stroller and go for a walk around your neighborhood. Go run some errands. I think any of these things are all different ways. Like they will fall asleep. And I love that too. Talking about that, it reminds me that it's just evidence that if you normally use the breast to put the baby to sleep, but then the baby falls asleep in the car, you know that the baby is capable of other ways of getting to sleep. And so it's just kind of reassuring for you too to kind of see that.
Yeah, agreed. And I definitely had that experience, especially doing housework for some reason. Both my babies would fall asleep in a carrier if I was doing housework. It was almost a guarantee, no matter how noisy, the vacuum, like, I guess that's more like white noise. So I guess that makes sense. But Yeah, for sure. Lots of other great strategies for getting them to sleep. So we do hear like one of the methods that I've heard about, and I think that sometimes gets almost like idealized as like the optimal, situation for some people would be that, once the baby, you have a sleep routine, right? You set up a routine where you do this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing leading up to sleep time. And then you put a drowsy baby in bed and they fall asleep just like that. So drowsy but awake, and then they, fall asleep on their own. And I guess the intention behind that is that, the babies are kind of doing it independently. I mean, you are setting up like an environment that brings on sleep, but then, at the end they fall asleep on their own. And that there could be some benefits to that. And a lot of people like the idea of being able to do that. And so what do what do you say to that? Like, if that's something that you're really wanting to do, I mean, first of all, I just want to say, like, can that be nice? Sure, it can be nice. And it's not, it could be a great goal. Again, it's not the only way. Other ways are not wrong. And if this fits your lifestyle, your situation, it's what feels good to you, then great, go for it. But what might people need to know when they're like working toward that?
Yeah, that it's not a one size fits all. And sometimes we just really have to stay consistent and know that baby might protest that at first too. Um, and so I would encourage like being consistent with that. I think it's more common that babies really need that closeness and connection to fall asleep. But there are some babies that would happily and easily, like you can set them in the bassinet and they just go right to sleep and are totally content with that. And so, do I think it's worth trying for some families? Most definitely. Um, but I also don't want you to feel like it's not working if you feel like you try it and the baby protests a little bit, right? So I feel like I would always just make sure to, if the baby cries, we definitely want to be responsive to that. So definitely go get them. But I think trying things like consistency is a big one. So, like doing the same things in the same order. So that way the baby really starts to learn, like, oh, this is what's coming next. And they start to get used to like the pattern of things. So maybe at night you give the baby a bath and then we keep the lights nice and low and we put pajamas on and we read a story and then we breastfeed and then I put you in your bed. Like if we are doing those things in that order each time, maybe that will work for some people. But I think the consistency is what is really important. And then that social emotional connection, I think, is very important in this step. So if we're bottle feeding exclusively, or if this is just we're ready to not be breastfeeding at night anymore, I think again knowing that like this might be met with protest at first, and as long as we're responsive and loving them through it and supporting that emotion, then I feel like it's okay to keep trying, keep doing it. Um, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I tried that, and I was one of those that wasn't patient enough. I wasn't patient enough. I was like, oh, I'm so tired. I know the boob will work. Okay, let's
Oh,
just go do
same.
that.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is just so much easier. Like, why are we awake in the middle of the night when I know that I have the tool to like help you go back to sleep? Like,
Yeah.
let's just do that.
But that worked for me because I also, needed the flexibility of that. We did a lot of traveling to visit family. And so, it was always hard to like have a routine for very long, even like to be able to be consistent, to get that working. So, all right. And so let's say you've got, I mean, whether it's that kind of routine or whatever their sleep association is, but let's just use the breastfeeding. If you've been feeding the baby to sleep, and that's been working, and you've been doing that for a while, and it's time for a change. Like what would you say in that situation?
Yeah, if I think that we only need to make a change the when the parent is feeling like it is time to make a change. And I do want to say and acknowledge and give weight to the importance of that just because we know that like nursing to sleep is easier doesn't necessarily mean we have to be a martyr either. And so if you feel like it's not working for yourself, like then it's always okay to make that change. And so again, like we were saying, I think it really is the consistency, knowing that it's likely that change is going to be met with protest. But if we still keep working towards that change, babies will eventually get used to those other things. So again, pulling in like a special blanket or a stuffed animal, or depending on the baby's age, of course, the safety on the stuffed animal, I would more likely let's just bring in a blanket. And our bodies, right? Like we're going to pat them, comfort them, rub their back, do those things. And we're going to do that at every time we put the baby to sleep. And then eventually the baby again starts to associate that with sleep and not just the breast. And so that could be a good idea to do even way before you're ready to make that change. So then that way they really start to associate that with sleep as well. And that does make that transition easier.
Okay. Good. I think that that can be also harder or easier. And I think something that I wish I had known too, like I was with my first kid, it was easy. With my second kid, it was not easy. But with my first kid, she was 1.5 or 2. We were still breastfeeding, just not very often. It was mostly just for sleep time. And I just felt like that was enough. I was pregnant and didn't have much milk left, so it was uncomfortable. And I just was ready to kind of make a change. And she was a very verbal little kiddo. And I just asked her, I said, can we do something else instead today? And I had juice boxes, which for her was like super happy, exciting treat. And I happened to have one. I said, what if I give you a juice box today instead of milk? She used to call it booby milk. Instead of booby milk, what if you have a juice box today at nap time? Would that be okay? And she said, yeah. And had a juice box. And I don't know if dentists would like me saying this, like, yeah, we're going to drink a bunch of sugary juice right before we go to sleep. But this wasn't an everyday thing at all. But it worked. And that was it. From that point on, she understood that, like, we don't do this to go to sleep anymore, and didn't have any problems falling asleep. And so I always wonder, like, what if I had done that sooner? Like it was mostly me thinking like, this is going to be torture. Like, it's going to be terrible. I can't do anything about this. It's going to be so hard when I decide I need to, like, but it wasn't. It was really easy. My son was a different story. My son has always been a very different child. He's a little rebel. He likes to say, like, if you want this, I want something else. So, it helps me to understand now, at least, that, you never know, right? It might be really easy, might be much easier than we think. So.
Yeah, definitely. And then I feel like there are so many things that you can try. One of the things that worked for us was I got a book, and I don't remember the name of the book now, but it was about it's essentially telling the kiddo, because it's meant for the kiddo, and it essentially was saying that nighttime is for sleeping, and that the milk goes to sleep at night, and so we can't have milk again until morning. And so I started like reading him that book like every night at bed, and I was like, okay, the milky has gone to sleep, like that's it, we can cuddle, we can still be together, I can rub your back, but the milk is gone for the night. And that worked for us.
Yeah, I love that. I didn't know about that, but I bet there's, we get creative when we need to be, right? And I
Yeah.
think the most important thing I hope that people can take away is that there are no judgments. You're not doing it wrong. If someone out there is saying like, this is the best way to do this thing and that way is wrong, most of the time, like anytime I hear something like that, like this is the best and that is wrong, like that sets my alarms going, because I want to say like that's probably not true, right? And so really just kind of tuning into your intuitions, tuning into, I mean, yourself, your family, your lifestyle. There's so many factors that go into parenting that would make something either right or wrong for you. And if that's, a juice box or a book or, whatever the thing is, that I've heard so many creative solutions from parents that you're not going to read about in a book, that they just kind of figured out for themselves. And that's great, right? It doesn't have to be exactly the way everybody else, or the way we think everybody else does it, but most of the time we don't really know what everybody else is doing.
Oh,
Right.
that is so true. I think about that a lot in reference to sleep. Like when, we see on social media, like all of these wild stories that are shared about their infant's sleep. And I'm like, I don't know if I believe you because it's more common. It's the normal thing is for babies to wake often. Their sleep cycles are completely different than ours. It would not be a normal or natural thing for a newborn to sleep 12 hours. Like we have to have realistic expectations of what's normal for babies. And I think adjusting our expectations definitely helps navigate like all the feelings and our ability to handle, the things that come up.
And I love hearing this from you, because I mean, you're with parents of newborns every day, right? I mean,
Right, like even in my lactation role, like thinking of it,
yeah.
like even just as a lactation consultant, I literally see families every single day and can confirm that everyone's babies are waking up every 2 to 3 hours. Um, yeah,
Yeah. Because they talk to you
absolutely.
about all that stuff, right? They
Yes,
ask
exactly.
you all those questions. And so you've
Yeah.
heard it from hundreds, if not thousands. I mean, you've been doing this long enough where you have a pretty good snapshot of
Yes.
new parenthood. Right? Okay. Thank you so much, Cassie. It's always a
Yeah.
pleasure talking to you.